Good morning. It's December the 7th, and I'm here with Ms. Tomei, who's a teacher in Douglas County, and we are going to go over the stakeholder presentation for my pilot study, which is teaching science outdoors as a means to improve student achievement. I wanted to start with this quote. It's good to realize that if love and peace can prevail on earth, and if we can teach our children to honor nature's gifts, the joys and beauties of the outdoors will be here forever. And I think that as we think about teaching science, we have a responsibility to pass on not only the beauties of the outdoors, but what it means to take care of the animals and plants that live there so that it's there for future generations. Well, in this study, as you know, the research goal was to investigate the relationship of outdoor science experiences and students' attitudes toward science to their achievement on selected science standards. So as we did that, the question that we used was to what extent do student attitudes toward learning outdoors affect their achievement level on a science standard that's taught outdoors. So we chose from the Georgia Performance Standards, and you developed a lesson. And but before that, I had been researching the literature and planning the methods that we would use. So let's touch briefly on the literature, and then we'll talk about the methods before we get into the results. Probably the most important work on the topic is Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv, and that came out in 2005. There are a number of other books and journal articles that are important, but that work in particular set the stage for what needs to be done in environmental education and how the type of world that we live in as far as the access that students have to electronics both at home and at school affects their interaction with the outdoors. Now, that work did not touch so much on what it means for education, but as educators, that's our part to take over and do that. There are a number of journal-related articles, and many times when I've talked to you, I've encouraged you to read Science and Children and Science Scope, and I know that you really have embraced both of those publications, so I'll encourage you to continue to do that and possibly to even look at some of the articles that I used for the background for this paper. Well, you know that the survey was intended to include all 25 students in your class. We had 21 that responded positively, and so we had one that we had a little bit of incomplete data on, so we actually ended up using 20 for the study itself. And you know the demographics of your students, so I won't go over that, but that will come into play as we look at results a little bit later. And while we can't really generalize from these for the entire fourth grade or for all fourth graders, it might help you in your teaching. So we did the data collection twice, we did the achievement test twice, and now I think it's going to be most beneficial for you as the stakeholder at the school level to go over the findings, and we'll have some graphs on the screen, and we've got some laid out here on the table to look at as well. And the first graph that I want to look at is about the boys in the class, all the male students, and I've broken them down by ethnicity. A couple of interesting things that I'll point out. If we look at students of mixed race or other on the graph, we can see a substantial change both in achievement and in attitude. Some of the other groups, as you can see, for example, the white students did have some improvement, but not quite as much, and that actually held true for both achievement and attitude. Our Asian students actually remained static, and even though there's a slight difference for African American and black students, we could almost say they remain static too. So that might be something to think about at a later time, and if there's a way that we could affect change there.
Okay.
And then we can compare that with female students by ethnicity, and we see that for female students, there was not a huge change in achievement for any group. One group went down slightly, two groups went up slightly. But we do see an improvement in attitude for each group. Now, that's really not what we were particularly looking for. However, it's an interesting finding. And so I think in particular when we think that students were not necessarily having great gains in the achievement, but they were having really big gains in the on the attitude survey, maybe there's something we could think about how that could impact teaching and learning a little bit later on, and how you might follow up on that. Now, if we compare on the same graph the gender, the pre and post test, and the pre-attitude survey and the post-attitude survey, we see that again, the boys had some improvement in achievement, some improvement in attitude. Girls remained static basically when you put them all together on achievement, and but they did have a gain in achievement. So I've thought a little bit about what that could mean for your teaching. Is there anything that you maybe would want to ask, or do you have any ideas about how we could use that data? Or I'm just kind of curious to get your impression of the data, especially when it comes to the attitude.
Sure. I'm curious if doing more outdoor lessons is going to continue to impact the female population in my class, because it seems to me that they're the ones that improve the most as far as attitude. So I'm wondering if doing even more outdoor activities would be beneficial.
Well, again, we cannot generalize for everybody, but we can use this data from your class. So it might be interesting to try another outdoor lesson. And while this one was on ecosystems and animals, basically, you might even think about in an earth science unit where they're looking at weather patterns. Weather would be a great topic to study outdoors. And if the girls, if it really helps their attitude toward learning science to go outdoors, maybe you want to throw in a lesson on your weather unit that is outdoors, and you could even use the same survey again, because the survey, as far as attitude, was general. It wasn't specific to the lesson we taught. So we could see what happens with that. And I think if you notice that your girls, if their achievement is lower, or if it's lacking in particular strand of your science standards, that might be a good time to think about an outdoor lesson, because for some reason it seemed to boost their attitude, and I think we both know that that can have some impact potentially on their achievement. So it's certainly something to consider and to think about doing again as you move forward this year. And then you might even think about how, if you were interested in just doing some of your own action research, you might think about using these surveys in additional years, just to get an idea of where your students are and where they're going.
Absolutely.
So let's look a little bit at some of the individual items on the attitude survey. One that really seemed to improve in attitude was I like science. So out of our 20 students, the ones that strongly agreed on that were around 9 or 10, and then it went up to around, say, 14 or so after the outdoor lesson. And then we only had 8 students say that they would like to learn science outdoors before we went out. But then once we had done that, or you had done that with them, that went up to 15 students. And then, not as significant, but still a small increase, was learning science outdoors helps my understanding. So the students they recognized some of the value. And I think one of the interesting things was that no student left any attitude item blank. and they were fairly consistent. For instance, like the students who maybe their attitude didn't change at all, it was just static before and after, it was the same score. So we know that they were reading the questions, and we think they were answering truthfully.
Wonderful.
So I think, as a classroom teacher, you should be proud of your students for their thoroughness and their willing to participate, individually. Okay, so we have a number of graphs here, and basically what we ended up doing, this is a kind of a descriptive analysis in academic terms of the data, because we can't generalize for an entire population. But we've talked about a couple of things that you could consider doing for the rest of this school year, since this data is about this class. You could certainly repeat the study in future years, or you could invite your colleagues, other teachers of 4th grade, to do this. And you might even think about, since your science is divided into several units, you might think about adding an attitude survey to every unit, whether it's about going outdoors or not. I would like to see other elementary teachers take responsibilities you have for how your kids are not only learning science, but also thinking about it and their attitude toward it, and trying to make it enjoyable so that it's something that they look forward to and that they feel capable in.
Well, it's very interesting because they really took the time and, read the questions and, thought about it before and after the unit. So I think that if we did that on all of our lessons, we would learn so much about how our students learn, which I think would really impact their achievement even more if we really took the time as a grade level or as a school to utilize these attitude surveys, especially because, the more you know about your students and how they learn best, I think the better teacher you are, the better their achievement. So I think this was a great idea.
Well, I'm glad you said that, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I think let's look at one more piece of data before we move on, and a couple more attitude survey items. Spending time outdoors at home did not change before or after, but it makes me think, might they want to? Because enjoying time outside did improve, and then wishing the class went outside more often improved. So those might be items that would be helpful to follow up on later in the year, just for your own information.
Absolutely.
So let's think about what other conclusions we can reach. We've looked pretty carefully at the findings. So one of the things that I probably will do is just some further analysis of the individual items on the attitude survey. As I've told you, I'll repeat this study with a larger group. So when I do that, because the research question really was not about gender and ethnicity, but I found interesting things there, I might change that question or just add another question, because it would be good to have a couple of questions in the survey. And I think that in addition to sharing this with you, I will encourage those who couldn't be with us today, your administrator and the school system level folks, I will encourage them to watch the video of the presentation today and to look over the PowerPoint and the graphs. And I'll be providing your administrator with a copy of the research paper as well. And I think that one other idea I'd like to touch on is that I mentioned you taking a look at some of the journal articles, and you did actually use one of the activities from a book that's one of the resources here. But I'll certainly encourage you to look at the other items that were used. Some of them are great resources for teachers, and if there are ones that you don't have in your school, perhaps I can help facilitate that.
Excellent.
Do you have any other questions or suggestions for improving the research experience when working with teachers, or about the items on the study, or anything at all?
I mean, I think just making it easy for them and not so time consuming, because our time is so limited, which you did an excellent job. You know, this was something that could be done very easily with the students. We were already giving them the assessment anyway, the pre and post. So all they had to do was fill out the attitude survey and then do the lesson, which I was already going to do anyway, which correlated with the standards. And you gave us plenty of resources to use to help plan activities that were great for outdoor science. So just having you as a resource has been really helpful, and making it very easy on the teachers, I think, encourages them, you know, and then going over the results as well to show us how it can improve our student achievement, I think, is very beneficial.
Well, maybe one of the ways that we can follow up is to consider including this if you are doing any more presentations for your faculty as the science contact for your school. And we might even think about looking for other surveys and making suggestions to them for different grade levels or different topics. And I think that we've covered most of what I needed to, and I think we've answered your questions. I hope that participating in the study has been useful for you, and that if I asked you to do it again, that you'd be willing to.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thanks for coming today, and please let your administrator know that I'll be passing along additional information since he couldn't be with us. And thank you again for everything that you've done to help with this project.
You are so welcome.